Hello, friends of Studio Brule. This is Steve Brule, and it is coffee time. We're going over some of the things that come across my desk in the last few days. Today we've got a special guest with us, Bettina Arndt, who should be no stranger to folks on this channel. Bettina is from Australia and is famous for her work in gender equity, gender justice issues, as she can describe it better than I can. And she has been exposed to the cancel culture in a very nasty way this year, 2020. And so without no further ado, I'm going to bring Bettina right into the stream here. And Bettina, how are you?
Great, Steve. Nice to talk to you.
It's been a long time. Probably 3-4 years now. 3 years?
Something like that.
Yeah. So, I guess the first topic I'll get at, and we're going to get to some of the cancel culture as it pertains to university campuses, which of course also intersects quite strongly with freedom of speech issues. But let's first touch on this big event in your life this year. You were issued the Order of Australia early in the year, is that right?
Yes, it's an honour. It was called, a Member of the Order of Australia. And that was an Australia Day honour that's given at the very end of January. And that was my big mistake. Here I've been advocating for men for decades, and the feminists haven't been able to get me because I didn't have a job. There was nothing they could get me fired from. I was a sole trader. And accepting this honour gave them an opportunity to go after me in a big way.
Yes.
What really annoyed them is the wording of the honour paid tribute to my work for gender equity through advocacy for men. And of course, that was a red flag. And I of course, realised that would annoy them. But boy, did they decide to go for broke. And what was fascinating for me is within hours of that being announced, there was all this orchestrated campaign started, and they produced all this material, carefully edited videos designed to be as damaging as possible, quotes from articles I'd written, all sorts of information that was really designed to do the maximum possible damage to me. And it was all fascinating. We know exactly where it came from. It came from an end rape on campus activist who I've been battling for years now, because of course one of my major campaigns has been to expose the kangaroo courts, has been exposing the fact that our universities are adjudicating rape on campus. And this whole mechanism to do that came about as a result of the end rape on campus activists lobbying, and I'm out there lobbying to have them dismantled. And of course, I'm enemy number one for this group. And this particular woman, Nina Fuddle, has been attacking me publicly for years and years. And the honours gave her the opportunity to mobilise the whole media against me. And I must say, she did a very good job.
The one thing that I see in a headline here, I'm just going to pop it up, that somebody is saying that your comments regarding Hannah Clark's murder condemned by Senate, and or is that connected to the Order of Australia could be stripped?
Okay, well, what that's all about. Okay, that was like nearly 2 months into this campaign against me. I mean, within a day, they had an Attorney General, who's the chief legal officer for the state of Victoria, condemning me and saying my award should be rescinded because one of my work is damaging to victims, sexual assault victims and victims of violence. I mean, they rolled out all these big players to demand my award being rescinded. They produced, as I said, all this material. I mean, it's just what I think is really interesting about looking back on it all is, I think in a way the feminists overplayed their hand. They showed their muscle, and they got every media organisation in Australia, with about 2 exceptions, to condemn me. And so this this murder you're talking about here was nearly 2 months into the campaign. And I'd been out there tweeting, and I'd been out there making comments on all sorts of issues, as I always do. And in this case, it was a horrific murder of a man had killed his wife and children, set fire to them in a car, and the police officer, there was a policeman in charge of the investigation, who made a public statement saying they were keeping an open mind in relation to the investigation, including the possibility, this was a quote from him, that he might have been driven too far. And that sort of quote we see, that sort of comment is made about every woman who kills children. We see it in the media all the time.
Yeah.
What drove her to it? What could possibly have caused a woman to act like this? And in this case, because the policeman made that comment, he actually lost his job. He lost his position heading up that investigation. Everybody jumped on him. They demanded he take his words back. And I tweeted support for him, saying he was just doing his job. And he should be congratulated for saying he was keeping an open mind. And looking back, I obviously could have worded that tweet more carefully. The whole experience has led me to pull back from, I'm not using social media anymore. I think it's too dangerous. It's too easy for people to manipulate words you use in a tweet. Because what they did, they got the Senate, which is our upper house in government, the national government, to condemn me, and they put forward a motion which quoted the policeman's words, not my words. They didn't have any inverted commas saying I was quoting the policeman. They condemned me for using the words the policeman had actually used, and the whole of the government condemned me. So that was obviously the really low point for me. I was just astonished. And I had senators ringing me prior to that vote. They were wedged, the government senators were wedged by Labor, by the Greens, who put this motion up. And they knew if they didn't vote for it, they'd be condemned for being against domestic violence, assault on women. It was one of the classic political maneuvers, and I was just the money in the middle. And many senators rang me up and said, I don't want to have to vote for this, but I have to. It was fascinating, but
it's cowardice too. It's cowardice. There's just a massive amount of cowardice involved in these people. He didn't have to. If all the senators actually voted with their character, none of this would go down. This is the problem, I think, is that we're living with a legacy of 50 years of cowardice. Yeah. And the feminists have taken total power of everything. Nothing would have been done to that police officer had he said what had driven the woman. If it was a woman who did it, nothing would have been done. He would have been celebrated for that very same comment to the opposite sex. Yeah. And what this tells me is that we're living in a world where justice and fairness is impossible. Yeah, absolutely. The classic, at that time, there was a terrible murder. A woman murdered 8 children, I think it was. And there was a ABC, a public broadcaster, had a big article saying what drove her to it. Yeah. Exact same words. The exact same words.
That passed without comment. So it is, it was an absolute demonstration of the fact that the feminists are in control. And they're manipulating all of our public discourse. It was just incredible watching one person after another, bow down to the feminists and using me to virtue signal by condemning me publicly. And of course, the worst thing that happened for me is the social media started going after my kids, which was extremely difficult. And at that point, I said, that's it, I'm enough. I'm not making any public comment. And the best thing that happened to me was COVID came along and saved me. It literally saved me, because I was on the front page of newspapers for week after week after week. The ABC, the public broadcast was devoting. I was the #1 news item for a whole weekend. like 2 months into this pile-on. It just went on and on and on. And then COVID came along and pushed my story out of the way. And it was just, I can't tell you what a relief it was. I was probably the only person in the world happy about COVID coming along.
And this article on April 9th is reporting that you will not be stripped of your Order of Australia.
Yeah. Well,
so that was good. Look, April 9th.
I was never going to be stripped. It's ridiculous. This is a government organisation that makes decisions about these honours. The committee that made the decision to award it to me was predominantly women, eminent women, and their regulations say very specifically they're not allowed to remove an honour from someone unless they go to prison, unless they commit a criminal offence. Some very serious events can have the honour stripped from you. But I was never in that. There was never any question I was going to retain the honour. But, of course, with COVID and they couldn't have their regular meetings. It all got delayed and delayed. I mean, it took me 10 months to actually have that award in my hot little hand. Steve, I just emailed you a photo of my award. Can you, if you can dig it out?
Let me look for it here.
It was only 2 weeks ago that I finally got it, which was pretty nice. But I mean, it was always going to happen that I would get it. It was just a question of when, the whole thing was a farce, but it was a very convenient means of the feminists trying to wake me out. Of course, they didn't succeed in cancelling me. I'm still there. I have big plans for next year, and have been working really hard on a number of campaigns I'm putting together for next year.
Do you think that a man in a similar situation would have survived this? Because these organizations, they may have rules in place, but they sure do bend over backwards to break them if they can punish a man. Do you think if a man would have been stripped of his order anyways, despite the rule?
No, they couldn't. There's no way they could strip them of the order. Obviously, they'd have had to go. I mean, it's funny, there's been a few men, I mean, they'd never seen anything like this. The Honours Committee, I was in regular contact with them, and they told me this was a cultural event in Australia, because they never, how about that? Looking very pleased with myself. This is a cultural event. They got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people writing to them. For, on one side saying I should be stripped of my award, the feminists galvanised all sorts of people to make complaints, but there were equal numbers of people writing in supporting me and saying, of course, I should have got the award and so on. So it was just never ending. I don't know. I mean, obviously there have been men in deep trouble with the feminists, but there's never been anything quite like this. I mean, what it says, Steve, is I was over the target. I mean, they wouldn't have bothered, would they? And so many powerful women and people wouldn't have come on board if I wasn't really dangerous to feminism. And so I see that as some cause of celebration, that I had clearly been getting under their nose, and I'd clearly been managing to do real damage to some of the feminist narrative. And I think that's pretty impressive.
Yes. Feminism is very strong in Australia, isn't it?
Oh, it is. And I was clearly getting at them. And that's, of course, for some celebration to me. I mean, if it's not as if they could afford to ignore me.
Now, in the past, you've been doing gender equity issues, and when we last spoke, I think we were talking about sex and marriage and stuff like that. But now you're focusing on the cancel culture on university campuses.
Yeah, I think Steve, I was probably starting doing that work then. I mean, my work on sex was a good decade ago, but of course it's particularly men. I mean, it's a really important issue. And to me, it's always been illustrative of the power imbalance now between men and women. The fact that women are absolutely entitled to deny men sex in a marriage, and there's no public comment about that. You're not allowed to discuss that. It says a lot about where we are in relations between men and women. But that my big work, I worked on that 10 to 15 years ago, and my work in recent years has been mainly focused on issues like domestic violence. That's been one of my key areas of drawing attention to these draconian laws that are in place that give women, entitle women to make false accusations and destroy men's lives. And two major areas they make accusations, of course, of domestic violence is the big one here in Australia, but also sexual abuse. And so that I've been speaking out about that for years and years. But the other bit, my real passion has been the kangaroo courts, the university, the fact that universities in Australia and everywhere, I know you just did a discussion with Janice Flamingo about a case, Stephen, was it a few weeks ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, about 3 weeks ago. McGill
Yeah.
University, yeah.
McGill University, same sort of thing. We have universities across Australia have been bullied by these activists I've been talking about, these end rape on capital activists. I mean, it was wonderful to watch. 10 years ago, I started writing saying this will happen in Australia because it was always already developing in America. They were having demonstrations on campus, claiming there was a rape crisis on campus. And then, of course, they got in America, they managed to get the Obama administration to require all publicly funded universities to set up tribunals to adjudicate sexual misconduct. We absolutely went down the same track, even though it was becoming very obvious this was a really dangerous state of affairs for the universities in America because they were being sued. There's been 650 cases of lawsuits against American universities over unfair processes that are part of these tribunals, where males are denied due process rights. And the vast majority of these cases, the universities are losing. Now, this was all happening, this was all really obvious, this craziness was going to lead to big financial impacts on the university and damaging to the university's reputation. And we did exactly the same thing. In Australia, it was just a sight to behold the way they orchestrated this. They lent on, we have I think you do too, a human rights commission, a government organisation for making decisions about human rights. They spent $1 million of taxpayer money to try to prove there was a rape crisis on our campuses. And, this lots of hoopla saying, we're going to get the evidence now about how often rape occurs. They sent out many, many thousands of these surveys, and they ended up with 0.8% a year of the students surveyed said they had any sort of sexual assault. And that was a really broad definition of assault that include, being touched in some sort of sexual way by a stranger on a tram, on a bus. Yeah. I mean, you couldn't have had a broader definition. And they got 99.2% of students saying that's never happened to them. And so I was the only journalist in Australia who wrote an article saying, let's celebrate our safe universities.
Yeah.
And every other media source in Australia bought into the feminist narrative, which was, we have a lot of sexual violence. Suddenly they started using this term sexual violence, which of course downplayed the rape figures and put a lot of emphasis on the sexual harassment figures, which was mainly unwanted staring. They had
unwanted staring.
Unwanted staring.
I've got to tell you a story about what some of the things you've said here. Back in 2013, I think it was, Janice gave a talk at Queen's University on the so-called rape culture, and there's no rape culture. And the Queen's University feminists, of course, who stir up all the crap, they went on and on talking about Queen's University is the rape center, Kingston, the rape center of Canada, and Queen's University is in the midst of a rape crisis. And so I looked at the statistics going back 10 years, and there was not one rape in 10 years at Queen's University, the previous 10 years. All of the records available showed 0 rapes. In fact, there was only 1 rape recorded in the whole city of Kingston, and it was not on campus. Furthermore, when you talk about, I knew some fellows that did work at Queen's University on construction, and the construction company, the construction workers were ordered that they could not look at women longer than 6 seconds, or they would be fired.
Yeah.
I'm serious. And this,
Yeah.
a 6 second rule. If you look 6 seconds at a woman, you will get fired.
Yep. No, it's all part of the same story.
Stare rape again. Yeah.
Yeah. But okay, so what? So they used this survey, and then they claimed there was lots of sexual violence. I wrote to every vice chancellor in Australia, saying, "What are you doing? Why are you scaring off overseas families from sending their precious daughters to this country by claiming there's a rape crisis when there isn't one?" And I asked them a whole series of questions and got these hilarious sort of Mickey Mouse answers from their media units saying nothing. And after I since then talked to people very high up in administration, and they were all, they were very conscious that they were being it was really emperor's new clothes. They were forced to lie about this issue because they didn't dare offend the feminists. So they all started putting all these regulations in place to adjudicate rape across the country on our campuses. And we have an organised sort of government body which oversees the universities, which tells the universities how to behave, and it's called TEXA. And that organisation sent out an order to the universities, like Obama did in a way, saying they had to set up these regulations for adjudicating rape. And since then, what the best thing about my recent media pile on is I've attracted a lot of eminent people to my work who are, had never contacted me before. I've got judges, I've got lawyers, I've got experts in tertiary education who know all the intricacies of how the whole thing is governed. And they're now advising me. And they showed that this university regulator had no authority to tell universities to get involved in what is usurping criminal law. They did that without they broke their own rules. And we're busy pursuing that now. But anyway, so what happened? We have every university in Australia with these sort of regulations in place. I've had this steady stream of students coming to me who've been accused. We hope we've now got a case where we're going to, for the first time in Australia, sue a university who treated one of the students so badly. But I've been in there fighting to get students to be allowed to finish their degrees who are being accused, finding them lawyers to support them in criminal cases. This has been my main battle. In fact, a year ago, I did a tour of the universities, speaking on campuses about this. And that had a funny sort of side effect because at one of the universities, there was such, like Janice, I ran into a very hostile crowd of students, and they had to bring in the riot squad to protect me and my audience. And that led to the national government setting up a free speech inquiry, which only just in the last few months, and the government is now legislating to demand that require the universities to properly have proper regulations regarding free speech. And that's a bit of my legacy, which I'm quite pleased about.
Well, that's much more than we have in Canada or the U.S. right now. We don't have any official, as far as I know, any official stance saying that we need to protect freedom of speech on campuses, which is terrible. Yeah. I got a quick question from a fellow named Xeranx here. Thank you for your support of Studio Relay, Xeranx. And he says, I've wondered what reaction you got from Jordan Peterson after the examples you gave him of early feminist slogans and ideas. I'm not sure what that refers to. Do you recognize that?
I think they're probably talking about, I did a long interview when Jordan Peterson was first in Australia. I was MC for two of his talks, and I did a sort of hour-long interview, and I did challenge him, which people seem to rarely do. I think he's pretty soft on feminism, although I agree with him on many, many issues, and I think he's extremely brave on a whole range of things. But if you try, as I did, try to pin him down on the fact that, the sort of things we've been talking about, the influence of feminism on relationships, the way women are unfairly using their power in personal relationships, those sort of things. I mean, he doesn't want to, he won't ever use the word feminism in that
Wow.
context, and he will back away from it. Anyway, you people can go on my YouTube channel and see that interview with Jordan, where I did put it to him, but he didn't really bite. I mean, I think he's right too. I mean, a person in his position, in a way, I mean, he's fighting he has to pick his fights, and maybe he
Well,
doesn't
yeah,
need
yes, I agree. Yeah, he has to pick his fights. But look, what I can see here is that feminism is causing the overwhelming majority of problems in our culture. They are attacking freedom of speech. They're attacking presumption of innocence. They're attacking men in general. They're recreating a racist culture through their insistence that whiteness is the problem. They know what they're doing.
Yeah.
You know, the average person in the culture, when they hear whiteness is the problem, they will see that as white people being the problem. This is racism 101.
Yeah.
Feminists are promoting this crap. So, to my mind, ignoring the incredibly destructive and malicious influence of feminism in our culture is to make yourself irrelevant.
Yeah. And it's interesting to me how even people who are, fierce critics of of identity politics and the left will rarely actually use the F word, will rarely talk about feminism. I mean, I can think of some very obvious examples in Australia, and they'll rile against the shutting down of free speech and so on, but they are too nervous to actually mention the word feminist.
And that shows you just how much power they have, doesn't it?
Oh, enormous power.
Totally, and it's the entire world. The feminist organization is organized right around the planet. It's incredible.
Yeah. I mean, what has been fascinating is watching the battle between feminism and the trans lobby.
Yeah.
For once, we've basically seen feminism wimp out. I mean, they're beginning to rise up against it. But, I mean, there's clear threat to everything feminism stood for. They took lying down for a long time, didn't they?
Well, they kind of box themselves in a corner when they say that gender is, completely open to whatever you want it to be. I mean, how can they object to trans when they've been saying that for so long?
I know.
Pretty hard.
I mean, that's been fascinating, really.
Yeah.
Anyway,
is for sure.
we live in interesting times, but I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I find it just shocking. I mean, even people like Warren Farrell, I had a discussion with Warren Farrell, who I have known for 30 years and have enormous admiration for. If you read his recent book which is a fabulous book about the war on men, I mean, he barely mentions the F word.
Yeah, I
know. And he's extremely careful.
He's extremely careful. And he voted Democrat, and the Democrat Party in the U.S. is the feminist party. It is everything about the Democrat Party lines up with feminism, Black Lives Matter, and Antifa. I had Warren Farrell on the show here about a month ago, I think it was,
did you?
and or 3 weeks ago, and we talked about this. And he and I had to come to agree to disagree, and because well, I don't see how you can avoid dealing with the evil of feminism in this world. I mean,
look at Joe Biden. Yeah, I mean, you've talked to Janice about the role of Joe Biden. Of course, he was the critical player when it came to the Obama administration and the establishment of these kangaroo courts I keep talking about. He was the person who said he wanted to use campuses to change the sexual culture of America. I mean, he was the person behind it all. And now
he's the VAWA guy. Yeah.
And now he's saying he wants to wind back the even minimal reforms that the Trump administration made to due process rights of accused men on campus. I mean, unbelievable.
It is unbelievable.
And he was largely one of the key people involved in putting through the Violence Against Women Act, which of course led to this powerful weapon being used by women to destroy men, the false accusations, the immigration fraud is a classic one where, they've set up so many benefits for women of making false accusations. One of the classic ones is you can get permanent residency. Same in Australia. I've got a woman I'm working with whose son had a one-night stand with a woman which seemed to have been pretty much set up in advance. And surprise, surprise, she got pregnant. They never had a live-in relationship. They never had an ongoing relationship after that. She got pregnant, had a child, and then she, even though she wasn't even living with him, she then accused him of domestic violence and she got her permanent residency.
Yep. I know we've incentivized the worst of behaviors. And so, like, when you incentivize a behavior, you got to realize people are going to take advantage of it. This is the absolute naivety and stupidity of these laws.
Yeah. And I mean, I've been in an amazing position because I've been in the media talking about these issues for decades. People come to me all the time. I mean, yesterday I got the father of a very prominent young man who's been accused of sexual assault, and his story's been in the news for years now, while these accusations play out, and he contacts me wanting to talk to someone about what it's been like for him. A policeman who's retiring from the police force contacts me and says he wants to talk about false accusations and the role of the police in having to go into people's homes when they don't believe the accusations that are being made about the man, but they're forced to drag him away from his home because of accusation of violence. Means the police have to act in our current culture. The police are under enormous pressure to throw that man out of his home.
And they'll lose their job if they don't.
And this policeman, said this is a total fraud. I mean, I have a whole file full of police who contact me, saying they're outraged at the role they're being required to impose unjust laws in Australia. And some of them are brave enough to speak out. There was one policewoman who put one of my articles up on her Facebook page and she nearly lost her job. It's a very great privilege to be out there publicly advocating for men and be the person that people, that so many people come to tell their stories. And I'm very conscious of that, and I'm no way I'm going to walk away from that.
Yeah, well, we can't walk away from it. It's our culture that we're seeing attacked. I've been telling men for a long time, especially men who have an ability is to leave the West. It is a toxic culture for men.
Where do you suggest they go?
Well, I'm down in the Dominican Republic, and I can tell you this. After being here for the last 3-4 years, it's entirely different. I mean, in Canada, you can feel the on the street, the tension of the hatred of men. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. And you don't have that at all here now. In fact, as an old white man, I'm afforded more courtesy and respect than normal in Dominican Republic. So I would say people look to those kinds of places. And women don't hate men here. That's a huge deal. It's a huge deal. Most of the Western world, women have been taught that it is their legitimate right to hate men and treat them like crap.
Yeah.
So I say, get out.
Well, we used to say, I mean, of course, there's been a tradition for quite a while of many men feeling they would be safer off with an Asian woman, which can be true. There are
until you bring them back to the U.S. or something. That's what happens.
Absolutely right. That's the problem. If you stay in Asia, where the traditional culture supports roles where men are treated with respect, then you might be all right. But I mean, I've had some ghastly cases of
it's the same. It's
Asian women coming back here, and then the domestic violence being the classic.
Yep.
Where
they'll make use of it right away. I mean, that's the same thing here. The culture sets the boundaries around what people should and can and do. And when the culture says that you will be rewarded for destroying a man's life, then you can bet that huge numbers of women are going to, even if they don't use the power to destroy the man, they will use the power within the relationship to dominate the relationship. The mere threat, the mere idea that she has that power destroys the possibility of an equal relationship. And to give you an example, to talk about what you're saying here, I've known some guys here, I've heard of stories of guys here who brought their Dominican girlfriend back to the U.S. and wouldn't you know it, the whole thing falls apart, and it ends up being just like your typical American marriage, disaster for the man. So when I say, you should leave the West, I don't mean leave, find a woman and come back. No, never come back is what I mean. Stay away. It's a toxic culture.
I think you're probably right. I mean, it's terribly sad. I never know what to say to young men because young men don't see it. I mean, most of my children's friends, they're all still in young, newly married relationships, relationships which are going fine. And I say to them, well, when I'm dead, when I'm no longer here, you're going to be in your 40s and 50s or whatever, and your friends will be getting divorced, and you'll see what happens.
You'll see it. You'll see it.
And it'll be too late, and you'll realise I was right. But they don't think, they think it's women who are the victims, and I mean, there's such a generational aspect to this now. And when I go out into the streets or go into a supermarket, the people who come up to me are the older generation, men and women, mainly women, lots of women, who say, thank God you're out there. I'm really worried about what's happening to young men in this country, and they all know men who've been mistreated, all know men who aren't seeing their children, they all know men who've had accusations. I mean, the knowledge is out there, and I get enormous public support. The classic, I think that we might have talked when I did my book. I had a book called #Men2 a few years ago.
I think we did talk about that in one of the live streams.
Yeah, and I went to, I did a breakfast show, a very big TV breakfast show, and it just so happened there were two women interviewing me who were very sympathetic to me, which is not so unusual, but it is in that sort of context. And they happened to have sons, and when I talked about all these issues of domestic violence and false allegations and so on, they said, well, they agreed that they were worried that this could happen to their sons and so on. And the Facebook page for this particular show, I mean, it was like 7,000 positive comments about, or likes or whatever, about the interview, and about 200 against. And what happens, of course, is the mainstream media attacked these women for giving me a free run, for letting me express my views, for not attacking me. I mean, that's what happened, of course. I mean,
the mainstream is run by feminists, right? It's the feminists run all the media, all the mainstream media.
Yeah. But then you look and see and if I do talkback, I mean, I can't get near talkback anymore in Australia. I mean, that's what's happened, is most of the media, mainstream media, has decided to cancel me, which is very sad for me after being in the media for 45 years of my life. But, I know if I get on a talkback program, or if most people agree with me. I've still got that. And we just have to work out how to get this army of people who hate what is going on to stand up for men and boys.
Absolutely.
And to start fighting the fight. And that is what I'm going to do next year. We're going to really mobilise people in Australia for this fight.
I'm looking forward to that. And we'll talk about that in a minute, what exactly your plans are. I just want to point out to folks here, as we were talking about how men leaving the West, I put a link in the comments about a video, Alternatives to Marriage, in which I discuss some of that stuff in detail. If you haven't seen it, have a look at that. So, Bettina, 2021 is your year to fire up people to combat the evil of feminism. Am I saying it right?
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, well, I think I would like to think I've been fired up for a long time, but of course this previous year's experience has given me more incentive to have a last hurrah, if you like, to use the next decade or so to really see what we can do. Some plans I can't talk about. I've been working for during the whole COVID period very carefully on a new project, which I've been delighted to come back and tell you about early in the new year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you give us a title of the project?
I don't want to know. There's a good
No?
reason why, but
Okay.
it is absolutely about trying to get the messages out about what's happening to men in this culture. And I hope it's going to work. We'll see. But if people watching this would like to help me, if they go to my website, they can sign up to my newsletter, and that's how I'm reaching people at the moment, because I'm not, as I said, I'm not doing any more social media, but I've got thousands on my newsletter list, and I can send you all of that, and that's what I'm using to reach my followers, if you like. And what we do is run constant campaigns where we get people, this is particularly Australian based, but getting people to write to government ministers about certain things, to try to stop the rot, to try to expose what's going on in our captured institutions. And we need people to really step up and do some hard work. And that's what I'm trying to mobilise now.
I just put the website or your website name into the comment section.
Very
and this here is the website, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okie dokie. Let's just close this little thing.
And and on that home page is a little box to fill in for the newsletter, and that's the best way to contact me. And yeah, you should be able to see all the videos and so on that.
Okay, folks, you should see the link in the comments here, and I'll put this link in the description of the video later as well.
Yeah, but we have plans, so I think we'll see how we go. But what is really exciting is I have so many amazing people who've come on board in the last year.
On board with this plan you're making?
On board with my little campaigns and wanting to help. And that's, we've got really powerful people, and many of them don't want to go public, which is unfortunate, but they're happy to lend their expertise to me to find out ways of countering the feminist narrative. And
we certainly need more people willing to go public, because this hiding behind the scenes all the time, that's just helping the feminists continue with their evil.
I know, but the trouble is, look at what happened to me. It's a very big lesson to people of the dangers of taking them on publicly.
It is, but it happened to you because so many people are hiding behind the scenes and they're biting their tongue in fear.
Yep, that's right. And if we can get a few more people to be brave, I hope we'll start to really expose what's going on.
I hope so. It definitely needs to happen. This feminist movement is just pure evil through to the core.
Yep. All right. Well, thanks very much. It's been very nice to talk to you today.
Well, thank you for coming on. And I will, before you leave, after we sign off, I'd just like to set a date, if we can, so when you were able to talk about this new project of yours in the new year.
Yeah,
so we'll get that.
January. We'll work it out.
Yeah. Sounds great. Okay. So, folks, thanks for joining us here on Studio Brûlé, and look for us. This next broadcast is on Friday with Janice Villamengo and Professor Saltzman from the University of McGill. We're discussing the cancel culture and the lack of freedom of speech on campuses again. So that's with Janice Villamengo this Friday. Until then, do something you love every day. And if you don't have something you love, find something you love, because no matter how bad it gets, this is your life. Enjoy it every day.